Hey guys, welcome back to the Antique Salvage Collector. Thanks for coming back this week. I'm going to show you some progress I made in the last week at the garage. Things are coming along, things are a lot different. Still a lot of work to go. There's still a giant mess on the floor. So I'm going to walk you through everything we've done since then. I'm going to show you a number of signs I've got hung. As you can see in the background here, progress, a little bit of progress being made, a few things hung. This week I decided to share with you the sign over my shoulder here, which is the 1930s porcelain shell sign. The reason I picked this sign to air this week was because this is the very first sign I purchased. This is where this entire collection began for me. I'm going to give you a little history of what I know about the Shell Oil Corporation of Canada, and I'm then going to tell you the story of where and how I acquired this sign. So Shell Corporation's been around a very long time. It's one of the oldest gas and oil companies in Canada, but it didn't start out as an oil and gas company. It actually started out by a guy named Marcus Samuel overseas. He was in the antique business, ironically, kind of funny. That was around 1833, I believe it was, and then he started import-export business with Shells, which is where the Shell initially came from and why the Shell logo was used for the gas and oil company that we know today as Shell. Marcus died around 1870s, late 1800s. He left his business to his two sons, and again, at the time that was a primary import-export business. Around 1880, about 10 years or so after his death, his sons got into the oil exploration business. They developed an interest there. I'm not sure they seen an opportunity. Great on them, because it turned out to be a billion-dollar corporation today. So good on them for recognizing that. Around 1892, Shell actually launched a fleet of steamers, which became I believe, the very first oil tanker to actually travel across waters and deliver oil in bulk. Around 1911, they opened up shop in Canada. So that's when they first came to Canada, started their operations in Canada. They would have been based out of Montreal. Around 1914, Shell was the first motor-driven tanker truck. They created the what we know today as the oil tankers you see that deliver on our roads. What I know here about Shell, it's just what I've learned over the years. Nothing I tell you on these videos today or any other day from now is set in stone. It's just history I've learned and word of mouth storytelling, the whole 9 yards. So don't take everything I tell you to bank. If I make errors, it's possible. I don't know everything. That's a wonderful thing about antique business and buying and selling and collecting. You're always learning, but there's no way you can know everything. So just keep that in mind with the information I give you here. Around 1915, I believe, Shell expanded into the West Coast. 1925, the first service station opened in Montreal under the logo and name of Shell. I believe back then they were the Shell Petroleum Company of Canada, I believe it was. Signs actually stamped Shell Petroleum Company of Canada. I'm going to show you that, and I'm going to show you the maker's mark on it, as well as the date. That's stuff that's important to look for when you're buying and acquiring these items. By 1928, I believe Shell had over almost 24 service stations in BC. By the 1930s, the first major oil company to introduce engine oil lubricants, and that's based on what they claim, right? Again, I don't know the exact history. I wasn't born back then, but from what I know, they claim to be the first. Around the 1931-32, they opened the first Canadian refinery in Montreal, and believe it or not, this is a sad part here, 1968, they claim to be the first gas station to open self-service gas stations, and that was opened, I believe, on the West Coast in Vancouver. And it's unfortunate because when you talk to a lot of the people that grew up in these eras, service stations were what they remember, full service. I mean, you pulled into a service station back in the 50s and 60s, a guy came out, he was dressed in a uniform, he had a hat on, he had a name tag, he had the logo of the company. You pulled in, you ran over that little hose, and the ding ding bell went, and he would come out. He'd come out of the gas station, and this is stuff we're going to talk about throughout all the videos. And they would offer full service. He'd come over, he'd squeegee your windows, he would pump oil in your gas, he would check your oil, tire pressure. I mean, that's an era that's long come and gone, and it's full service gas stations. Very few exist anymore. You can get somebody to pump your gas these days, but that's pretty much where it ends. Nobody's doing all that other extra stuff. And back in the day when you went to a service station, it was something else. Because most of like what I'm going to show you in my collection, This stuff is colorful, it's bright, and that was the idea behind the marketing. The idea, we went to a service station, oil cans were displayed high. I'm going to go through some of the literature I have here. I have different operation manuals from British American oil companies. I have different ones from Essos. And the beauty of the literature, which we're going to get into another video, is it showed you how to display, how to market your products. So when you went to a service station back in the 50s and 60s, it was a treat. Doesn't seem like it by the average person looking in, but guys will tell you, like, you got full service. So again, in 1968, they were the first to open the self-service, which basically led to the end of the demise of full-service gas stations over the course of the next 10, 20 years. And now you have what we have today. You show up, you pump your own gas, they take your money, you leave. 1970s, Shell was the first to remove lead from their gas. Most people that had old vehicles, I know my old Bronco here, I could show you when you look at the gas gauge on a lot of old vehicles, it says unleaded fuel only. Sometimes when you open up the gas cover, it's going to say on the inside, unleaded fuel only. Most people don't understand what that means these days, but back in the day, from most of the production of oil for the first almost 70 years had lead in it. And then as people learned more about lead and the health effects involved with lead, lead was eventually removed from gasoline. But essentially your gas was toxic. So I'm going to flip the video around here because from my last video I was told that everything's backwards, as you see in here right now. So when I flip the video lens around, you're going to hear my voice, you're not going to see me, but it should put things in the right direction here. So let's go over and take a look at the Shell sign here. Okay, so again, the reason I chose this was because this was the very first sign I purchased. It is a double, it's single-sided, but it's two pieces. And it's a porcelain enamel sign. And if you look right here, it says property of Shell Petroleum Corporation. And it's 3-30. So, as most people know that collect this stuff already, but though for those of you that don't, most of the signs from back in the day have a maker's mark and they are dated. It's a good indication of when you're finding something authentic, but it's not the end of the world if it's not there. Not everything was there. But most days everything's reproduced, so when you're looking at signs, and believe it or not, they reproduce big signs like this. This is a 6x6, like I said, probably like maybe 16 gauge steel, maybe a little thicker. It's very heavy, and if you look at the paint where it is coming off, you can see that it's actually fairly thick. So that's what's referred to as porcelain enamel, whatever way you want to call it, but that's what they're referring to. It's the thickness, which adds a lot of weight to the sign. So the sign is quite thick. So I'm just going to come back over here to where I was. Set this up. Yeah, so that's the very first sign I acquired. Again, like I said, back when I first got into this, when I watched the very first episodes of American Pickers back in the day. At the time, I was working for the SPCA as a bylaw enforcement officer. I was over in the New Waterford area. I don't remember what I was doing, but I drove by this house. When I drove by this house, I saw a couple signs. Sparked my interest, pulled in, knocked on the guy's door. He was out in the garage. Took me in the garage. We had a little conversation. He had 2 gas pumps in there he was redoing, and he had an old 60s 1-ton truck. He didn't own any of it. He said it all belonged to his brother. So he said his brother would be up here in a few minutes, so lucky me, it worked out. So a few months later, guy shows up named John. John, his brother introduces me to him, tell him I'm interested in the stuff. We have a little conversation, and John says, well, if you want to see some stuff, come up to my place. So he told me where he lived. I went over, and lo and behold, there was 3 buildings full of stuff. There was school buses outside full of stuff. There was lots of old Ford trucks outside, which was great because I love Ford trucks too. So I right then and there was the first time I met John. Went back and forth to John's place numerous times, and one day I'm walking through John's property. Old school buses down back, and I'm going back to look at them. There's some old truck parts and stuff down back as well. And when I go down to the back on the fence, the top half of the sign, because like I said, it's 2 pieces. Top half's hanging on the fence, bottom half's laying on the ground next to the fence. So we get to talking. At the end of the day, I buy the sign. I walk away with the sign. Very first sign I ever bought. Yeah, that's correct. And I'm going to tell you why. I had to think there for a second. But not the very first sign I've had, but it's the very first sign I bought. So I go back to my garage, brand new garage, just put it up, bare walls, not a thing there. I hang this sign up. On the way home, I stop at the Irving down on George Street, and this is in 2 pieces in the back of the truck, and I'm looking at it. It doesn't look bad hanging up there, but when it was in the back of the truck and you saw all those rust holes and the bullet holes, that's another thing about these. That's pretty cool. A lot of people shot these for fun back in the day. I'll actually bring you back over and show you a few bullet holes in her. So I'm looking at it, I'm pumping gas, and I'm standing there, and I'm like, geez, what did I buy this for? Am I nuts? I mean, it looked ratty. It looked harsh. So I take it back, I hang it up on the wall. It's the only thing there on this 24-foot wall, white wall, not a thing on the wall except for the Shell sign hanging. And I had buyer's remorse, believe it or not. Happens a lot. So I picked it up, I'm looking at it, I got buyer's remorse. But at the end of the day, once it filled the walls with the rest of the stuff around it, that sign looks pretty cool. That sign looks awesome up there right now with everything else in this garage. And it doesn't look near half as bad as it did when I first purchased it, even though I didn't do anything to it. It's one of those things you got to have everything else surrounding it, and it just brings out the characteristics, it brings out the color, it gets you excited about it again. So I hung that up on the wall, very first sign, which is why I chose it here. This is where it all started for me. Shell is not a focal point in my collection. I have 2 Shell signs here. Actually, I have a third one I didn't pick up yet. That's at a buddy's place. Again, don't tell the wife. Don't have really anything else. I think I have a couple glass bottles kicking around here for Shell stuff, but not really a focal point for my collection. But that sign I'll never part with, because it is the very first sign I ever purchased. And me and John spent the next, well, 7-8 years now as friends. John's retired. He's retired from the railway, which was something we had in common because I spent a number of years doing railway construction, starting high school, after high school. So we found that common ground. I had an interest in this. He had the stuff. He lived this era. He was taking the stuff home and nobody wanted it. So that worked out great. A lot of stuff in this garage I got from him. One of these days I'll introduce John. I'm either going to back out his place or he's going to come here because he'll stop by here and we'll hang out in this garage and we'll talk right till about 1 o'clock in the morning. That's the beauty of John. Most of the guys that hang out in my garage are old, retired. They remember this stuff. There ain't too many people my age interested in this stuff, and there ain't too many people my age that hang out in here with an interest in this stuff. So I'm about 30 years too late. Yeah, so very first sign, I'll never part with it. I'll never sell it. It'll always remain in my collection for that reason, because it's where it all began. And again, everything has a story here. That's the story of the sign. It's the very first one that I've ever purchased. And it came from a good friend of mine. So it'll always remain in my collection. Yeah, so I'm going to show you those bullet holes I got out there. Actually, that's a really cool. Yeah. So if you look right here closely, you can actually see. So it was shot from the back at some point. The bullet came through it. And that's why all the porcelain is chipped off it. And there's a lot of signs around here, a lot of signs in my garage, and most people that have old porcelain signs that were in use that aren't new old stock are gonna have those bullet holes in it. So I'm gonna take you around the garage here and show you some of the things we did. I started moving stuff out of the other truck box. So I have this big 7-foot by 10-foot Irving sign with matching end pieces that there's actually getting ready to go on the ceiling. So that's the frame for the sign. I still got to bolt the other pieces on, and I'm going to light that up. So we're just going to walk around. As you can see, these signs are now hung. Tire signs, muffler signs, nice porcelain AAA sign. Not much has changed over on this wall from the last time you saw it. Like I said, the mess is still on the floor, but that's only because these cans have to hang from the ceiling, and I can't do that until I get the big shelves or the big Irving sign put up. So as we come over to here, you're going to see some things have changed over here. We'll get to the ceiling in a minute. So I got these Ford signs hung. They all light up, except for the metal ones. Just got this puppy put up yesterday. That's a beautiful sign in itself. And I'm going to step back here so I can show you what else we did. we got the other Ford signs hung. So these all light up. So that's an 8-footer. That's about a 6-footer. A couple porcelain signs, white rose. I can tell you where every one of these came from. They all have a story. So just trying not to trip over stuff here. So I still got 2 more Ford signs to go up right here in this spot. We'll get that done. They're over here. One of them's actually new old stock replacement lens here in the crate that's never been opened. And then there's another one back there. Yeah, so anyways, thanks for tuning in this week. A lot of progress being made, a lot more to still be made. I never got to the basement yet, and there's still a lot of stuff in that truck box over there that has to come out. I've been slowly picking away at things, slowly moving things over. But yeah, tune in. We'll do another video next week. I'm hoping by next week I'll have pretty much most of the stuff out here, with the exception of maybe what might be in the basement. I picked a few things out of the basement that I knew were down there. It's kind of hard to put everything up when you don't know and you can't see everything you have. Yeah, so anyways, thanks for joining this week, guys, and hopefully you know a little bit more about the Shell Corporation, and yeah, we'll see you again soon.